Before anything else is said, something needs to be established clearly. The title of this is not a manipulation manual. It is not a collection of psychological tactics designed to engineer a specific response from someone who is pulled away. If that is what is being sought, a formula, a sequence of behaviors calibrated to produce the avoidance return as a guaranteed outcome, that is not what this is. Not because the psychology isn't real. The psychology is entirely real. But because any approach to this dynamic that begins from the position of strategy rather than from the position of genuine self-development will fail. Not because the avoidant will detect the strategy, though they might, but because strategy, in this specific context, produces the wrong version of you. And the wrong version of you is exactly what the avoidance deactivating strategies know how to handle. It is only the right version, the genuine, grounded, fully inhabited version of yourself that exists when you are no longer organized around managing their response, that the architecture has no adequate defense against. What follows is not about them. It is about you, about the specific, genuine, internally sourced development that changes your energy in ways that are not performed and cannot be performed, and that the avoidance nervous system, which is extraordinarily sensitive to the difference between authentic presence and managed presentation, will register with a clarity that no amount of strategic behavior can replicate. The changes described here are not techniques, they are the natural consequences of genuine self-possession. And genuine self-possession in the context of this dynamic is both the thing most likely to move the avoidant and the thing most worth developing, regardless of what the avoidant does in response to it. The first thing, and it is the foundation on which everything else rests, the thing without which the other things are performances rather than realities, is the genuine development of your own interior life independent of them, not the performance of independence, not the strategic presentation of someone who is doing well and moving forward, designed to communicate those things to the avoidant in a way that produces a particular response. The actual internally felt, genuinely inhabited development of a life that is full and meaningful and oriented toward your own becoming rather than organized, even partially, around the question of what the avoidant is doing or thinking or feeling or about to do. This is harder than it sounds. Not because you lack the capacity. You have demonstrated, across the full arc of everything described in the examination of this dynamic, a capacity for genuine investment and genuine presence that is anything but ordinary. But because the nervous system that has been organized around this connection, that has been running, at some level, the background calculation of what the avoidant's current state is, and what it means, and what the appropriate response to it might be, doesn't simply stop running that calculation because you decide it should. The calculation was a response to genuine attachment. And genuine attachment, when it has been as real and as specifically significant as this particular connection has been, doesn't deactivate on command. What does gradually deactivate it is not decision but investment. The progressive, genuine, accumulating investment of your attention and energy and emotional presence into the things and people and projects and experiences that constitute your actual life independent of this dynamic. Not as a distraction technique. Distraction is a suppression strategy, and suppression strategies don't produce genuine interior development. They produce the managed version of it that the avoidant themselves is expert in and that you do not want to replicate, but as a genuine reorientation of what your interior is organized around. A slow, authentic shift from a center of gravity that included them to a center of gravity that is entirely your own. That shift produces something in you that is visible to anyone who has known you in the context of this dynamic. It produces a quality that is difficult to name precisely because it is the absence of something rather than the presence of something new. The absence of the low-level monitoring that was always running. The absence of the subtle orientation toward them that existed even in moments when you weren't consciously thinking about them. The background awareness of their significance that colored your experience of everything adjacent to it. The absence of the particular kind of waiting that people do when they are hoping for something from someone who has not yet delivered it. When that absence is genuine, when it is not performed or manufactured, but actually present as the result of real internal development. It produces a quality of presence in you that is qualitatively different from anything the avoidant has encountered from you before. Because you were, throughout the dynamic, someone whose genuine investment in the connection was always slightly perceptible even when it wasn't being expressed. The avoidance nervous system registered it. It was part of what the deactivating strategies were responding to. Your consistent, genuine, specifically oriented caring about them was experienced by the nervous system as a form of pressure, however gentle, however patient, however carefully you managed not to express it as pressure. The caring itself had weight, the investment had a gravity, and the nervous system, trained to treat attachment as threat, was always running a background response to that gravity, even when the response wasn't producing visible behavior. When the gravity genuinely shifts, when your investment is genuinely reoriented toward your own life and your own becoming, the avoidance nervous system registers the change with the same sensitivity with which it registered the original gravity. It registers the absence of the monitoring, the absence of the waiting, the absence of the specific orientation toward them that was always present even when you weren't expressing it. And the registration of that absence produces something that the nervous system was not prepared for. It produces the protest response, the same attachment system activation that occurs in all attachment styles when genuine loss is threatened, the neurological signal that something significant is at risk of permanent departure, that the object that was being avoided needs now to be attended to, that the distance that felt comfortable when the other person was still oriented towards you has become, in the absence of that orientation, something more absolute and more costly than the avoidance system was accounting for. This is the dynamic that is being pointed to when people talk about the avoidant coming back when you stop chasing. Not as a tactic, as a neurological reality. The avoidance attachment system was quiet when you were pursuing, because there was no threat to the attachment. The attachment was available. You were consistently oriented toward it. The nervous system could maintain its comfortable distance because the distance was never actual loss. It was managed distance, with you still present and still invested and still representing available connection. The protest system, which activates in response to genuine loss, had nothing to activate against. Your genuine reorientation activates it, not your performed moving on, not your strategically timed period of no contact calculated to produce this response. Your actual, internal, felt shift away from the center of gravity they occupied. That shift is real in a way that the avoidance nervous system can register, because it changes the actual energetic quality of your presence when you are in contact, changes the actual content of your attention, changes the actual orientation of your interior in ways that are not fully controllable through behavior management, and that therefore read as authentic to a system that has always been sensitive to the difference between performed and genuine. The second thing is the development of genuine self-knowledge about what you need and what you will not accept, not as a set of rules you have decided to enforce, not as a negotiating position designed to communicate your value by making yourself less available, but as the actual, deeply held, non-negotiable clarity about what a relationship needs to look like in order for you to genuinely thrive within it. This clarity, when it is real, changes the way you hold yourself in every interaction. It changes the quality of your listening, from the listening of someone who is hoping for specific signals to the listening of someone who is genuinely assessing what is actually present. It changes the quality of your responses, from responses calibrated to manage the avoidance comfort level to responses that are simply and authentically your own. It changes what is visible in you when you are in proximity to the avoidant, from the subtle availability of someone who is hoping for a particular outcome to the genuine equanimity of someone who is open to an outcome but not dependent on it. The avoidance system reads all of this. The difference between the hoping and the equanimity is not visible in any specific behavior that could be identified and labeled. It is present in the quality of the entire interaction, in the specific texture of being in your presence when you are genuinely equanimous rather than genuinely hoping. And that texture, The texture of genuine equanimity, of someone who is fully present and fully open without being organized around a specific desired outcome, is precisely the quality that the avoidance nervous system finds most safe, most genuinely safe, not the managed safe of someone who is performing non-neediness, but the actually safe of someone who is genuinely not needing in the way that the threat response was always responding to. The third thing is the development of genuine alternative investment, by which is meant the actual, committed, emotionally real investment of your caring and your presence into other people and other relationships in your life, not as substitutes for the avoidant connection, not as performances of being fine, but as genuine expressions of your own capacity for connection directed toward people and contexts that are fully available to receive it. This is important not primarily because it makes you appear less available to the avoidant, though it has that effect. It is important because it actually changes your interior experience in a way that is not replicable through any other means. When your capacity for genuine connection is being expressed and received and reciprocated, when the caring and the attunement and the genuine presence that you bring to relationships is being met with something that honors it, the interior experience of that is qualitatively different from anything that the avoidant dynamic produces. It is what genuine mutual connection feels like from the inside. And once you have the felt experience of that mutuality, to compare against the experience of the avoidant dynamic, the comparison is not subtle. It recalibrates what you understand yourself to be deserving of, not through intellectual argument. You probably already believed intellectually that you deserved reciprocity, but through direct, felt, neurologically encoded experience of what reciprocity actually feels like in the body, in the nervous system, in the specific physical quality of being genuinely received by another person, rather than being consistently oriented towards someone whose receiving was partial and conditional and complicated by the architecture of their own fear. That recalibration changes you in ways that are visible. Specifically, it changes the baseline expectation that your nervous system carries into its assessment of any connection. Where previously the avoidance partial, conditional, fear-complicated receiving might have felt like something to work toward, the baseline shifts towards the actual experience of genuine reciprocity that the other connections are providing. And the shift produces, in your assessment, of what the avoidant connection is and what it would need to become in order to be genuinely satisfying, a clarity that is more honest and more complete than anything available, when the avoidant dynamic was the only relational reference point you had. The fourth thing is the development of genuine comfort with your own company, not the performance of comfort with solitude, not the projected image of someone peacefully independent who doesn't need other people, but the actual, grown, developed capacity to be with yourself in a way that is genuinely nourishing rather than just managed. The capacity to find your own interior interesting, to be in the quiet without the quiet feeling like deprivation, to occupy your own life with genuine engagement rather than with the background awareness of what is absent from it. This matters specifically in the context of the avoidant dynamic, because the avoidance system is extraordinarily sensitive to the quality of a person's relationship with themselves. The person who is comfortable with themselves, who doesn't require external validation to remain regulated, who can occupy their own interior with genuine ease, rather than with the suppressed anxiety of someone who needs more than they currently have. That person reads to the avoidance nervous system as genuinely safe, not as someone who doesn't need connection. The avoidance system doesn't find actual isolation appealing, whatever the architecture claims about preferring solitude, but as someone whose need for connection comes from a place of abundance rather than scarcity, who is offering genuine mutual engagement rather than seeking the other person to fill a lack. The distinction between abundance-sourced connection and scarcity-sourced connection is one that the avoidance system reads with the same sensitivity it reads everything else. The scarcity-sourced connection, however genuine the feeling it comes from, carries the quality that the threat response system is conditioned to treat as pressure, the specific pressure of someone whose well-being depends on the connection, whose regulation requires reciprocation, whose investment has a quality of needing rather than choosing. The abundant sourced connection, genuine, warm, freely offered from the secure base of someone who is fully okay with or without the specific outcome, doesn't produce the threat response. It produces something closer to its opposite. The fifth thing, and it is perhaps the most specific and the most practically significant, is the development of genuine clarity about what you are willing to accept going forward, not as a performance of standards designed to communicate your value, but as the actual, lived, non-negotiable clarity that comes from having been in this dynamic long enough to understand what it costs you and what you require in order to genuinely thrive within a connection. This clarity, when it is real, produces a specific quality in the way you engage with the avoidant if engagement occurs. It produces the quality of someone who is genuinely interested in what is actually present, rather than in what might be possible if the right conditions developed. Who is paying attention to what is actually being offered, rather than to what the feeling of the connection suggests could eventually be offered. Who has a real, internally held, non-negotiable threshold below which the investment of genuine self is simply not available. The threshold is not a weapon. It is not held out in front of you as a warning or a demand or a statement of conditional availability. It is simply present in the way you engage, in the quality of your attention, in the honesty of your responses, in the genuine equanimity with which you receive what is offered and assess it against what you actually require. And the avoidance system, encountering this quality of genuine discernment, rather than the hoping and adjusting that characterized the previous dynamic, encounters something it has not encountered from you before. Someone who might actually leave again, not because they are staging a departure to produce a response, but because they have developed, through the full arc of what they have been through, the genuine self-knowledge and the genuine self-respect to recognize the difference between what they deserve and what the avoidant is currently capable of offering, and to act on that recognition in the direction of their own well-being, rather than in the direction of the hope that the avoidant might eventually become what the connection always had the potential to be. The avoidant who encounters this version of you, genuinely invested in your own life, genuinely equanimous in your engagement, genuinely discerning about what you require, genuinely comfortable in your own company, genuinely connected to alternative sources of mutual investment, encounters something that the deactivating strategies have no established response to. Not because the strategies stop. They don't stop. The architecture is still present. The fear is still operative. The threat response system is still running its assessment of whether the level of intimacy the interaction is approaching requires the deployment of management. All of that is still happening. What is different is that the assessment keeps coming back with a result the system was not designed to produce. The result that says the threat level is manageable, that the person in front of the avoidant is not organized around needing a specific response from them, that the caring is genuine but not desperate, that the availability is real but not unlimited, that the connection being offered is worth engaging with because it is genuinely offered from a place of security rather than from the scarcity that always gave the avoidance threat response its most familiar material to work with. The system, running this assessment and getting back results it doesn't know how to respond to, with the standard deactivating protocols, begins to do something that is extraordinarily rare in the history of the avoidance relational experience. It begins to settle, not completely, not without the retreats and the oscillations that the reconditioning process always involves, but measurably across the course of interactions with you, the activation level that genuine closeness produces begins to modulate toward the lower end of the threat response range. And at the lower end of the threat response range, the deactivating strategies don't run with the same automatic efficiency. There is space in the lower activation for something else to operate, for the genuine feeling, which was always there, always real, always the most present thing in the avoidance interior, even when the architecture was working hardest against it, to surface into conscious experience and behavior without being immediately intercepted. This is what is meant by the avoidant begging to come back. Not literally, not in the dramatic form that the word begging implies, but in the functional sense of the avoidance system, encountering the genuine version of you that has developed through the full arc of your own growth, generating an approach response that is stronger than the avoidance habitual avoidance response. The wanting to be closer that is stronger than the wanting to be safe. The pull toward what you now represent, genuine security, genuine self-possession, genuine mutual investment, freely offered. That exceeds the push of the fear that has always won before. It doesn't always look like a direct approach. It often looks subtler. The message that arrives in the form of casual contact that is carrying something much heavier than its surface suggests. The increased attentiveness in shared contexts. The specific, uncharacteristic willingness to remain in a conversation that is reaching towards something real, rather than deflecting before it arrives. The quality of being more present than the avoidant has ever been in previous interactions with you, more specific in their attention, more honest in their communication, more willing to let something genuine pass between you without immediately managing it into something safer. These are the signs that the protest response has been activated by your genuine development, that the wanting has broken through the architecture's resistance sufficiently to produce behavior that is oriented toward you rather than away from you. Not because you performed the right sequence of actions, but because you became, through genuine work on your own interior, the specific version of yourself that the avoidance system cannot manage its way past. What you do when those signs appear is the most consequential decision available in this moment. And the most important thing that can be said about it is this: respond from the place of genuine clarity rather than from the place of hoping. Respond to what is actually present rather than to what the present seems to promise. Receive the increased approach with genuine warmth and genuine engagement, because the approach is real and deserves to be met with something real, and simultaneously maintain the clarity and the threshold and the genuine discernment that your development has produced. Because the approach, however genuine, is not yet the sustained, consistent, architecturally reorganized presence that would constitute the actual change the connection requires. It is the beginning of the beginning. The protest response, however strongly activated, requires the sustained evidence of the reconditioning process to become the stable, available, genuinely present engagement that you deserve from a connection you invest your genuine self in. And the reconditioning process, as has been described in the examination of how avoidant change actually occurs, requires time and consistency and the specific, non-anxious, grounded quality of engagement that you are now, through your genuine development, actually capable of providing. This is the moment where your development and the avoidance development have the potential to meet in a way that was never available before, where what you have become through the arc of this experience, genuinely self-possessed, genuinely discerning, genuinely available from a place of abundance rather than scarcity, meets what the avoidant is becoming through the arc of their own regret and loss and interior confrontation, where two people, each having undergone something significant and each having been changed by it, encounter each other again, not as the same people who produced the dynamic that hurt them both, but as something in the direction of who they each need to be in order for something genuinely different to be possible. Not guaranteed, the contingencies remain. The avoidance development may not yet be sufficient. Your development may have taken you to a place where what the avoidant is currently offering is genuinely insufficient for what you now require. The timing may not align in the way that both people's processes would need to align for the reconnection to be something other than a repetition, but possible. Genuinely, specifically, non-trivially possible in a way it was never possible before. Because you are not the same person you were when the dynamic was running. You are the person who survived the dynamic and understood it and did the genuine interior work that it demanded and arrived at the other side of that work with a quality of self-possession and clarity and genuine comfort in your own life that is both the thing most worth developing for its own sake. and the thing the avoidance. System has, in all its sophisticated, decades refined management of what it allows through, absolutely no established defense against. You did the work. You became this, not for them, for you. And the becoming, genuine and complete and fully inhabited as it is the only thing that was ever going to break through an architecture that strategy could not touch, that patience alone could not dismantle, that love alone, however real, however deep, however specifically and irreplaceably directed at the person beneath the wall, could not by itself reach. Your genuine wholeness reaches it every time, without strategy, without performance, without anything other than the fully inhabited, genuinely developed, completely authentic reality of who you have become. That is what this was always pointing toward, not a technique, not a formula. You, the real, complete, self-possessed version of you that exists when you are no longer organized around the question of them. That version of you is what they come back for. And more importantly, it is what you were always becoming anyway, with or without them, especially without them. The especially without them is the part that tends to arrive last and mean the most, because the becoming that happened in the absence, the specific, interior, non-linear development of genuine self-possession that the dynamic demanded, and that the distance from the dynamic finally made possible, that becoming was not accessible while the dynamic was active. It could not have been, not because you were doing anything wrong during the dynamic, but because the dynamic itself was consuming the psychological resources that the becoming requires. The attention that was going toward reading the avoidance signals, the emotional energy that was going toward managing your own responses to their oscillations, the cognitive bandwidth that was occupied by the background calculation of where things stood and what the latest behavior meant and what the appropriate response might be. All of that was real investment going toward a real connection. And it was not available simultaneously for the specific, inward, self-oriented work that genuine self-possession requires. Distance created the availability, not comfortably, not without the specific grief of having the resources freed by the loss of what was consuming them, which is one of the crueler ironies of this particular arc, that the thing whose loss made the becoming possible was also the thing whose presence made it impossible. But the availability was real, and what you did with it, however conscious or unconscious, however deliberate or simply the natural consequence of a person with your particular quality of interior life being given unstructured space to inhabit themselves fully, was become, in the specific, genuine, felt sense of the word, not becoming a better version of the person who was in the dynamic, becoming a more complete version of the person who existed before the dynamic organized itself around the question of the avoidant. That more complete version has specific characteristics that are worth naming, because naming them is part of the process of fully inhabiting them, of knowing what you have built rather than simply having built it without registering the building. The first characteristic is what could be called narrative sovereignty, the ownership of the story of what happened, not in the sense of having a fixed interpretation that never gets revised. The story of what happened between you and the avoidant is genuinely complex and genuinely has multiple legitimate perspectives, and the person who has done genuine interior work around it holds that complexity rather than resolving it into simplicity, but sovereign in the sense of having a story that is yours. That was not written by the avoidance deactivating strategies, or by the shame that the dynamic could have deposited in you, or by the false conclusion that the architecture's behavior toward you said anything definitive about your worth. The story you carry is the accurate one, the one that sees what was real and what was fear-driven and what was the pattern operating and what was genuine feeling beneath the pattern. The story that knows the difference between the avoidance incapacity and your inadequacy and has filed them correctly, rather than confusing them. Narrative sovereignty is not a small thing to carry forward. It is what prevents the lessons of this experience from being the wrong lessons. The person who leaves this dynamic without narrative sovereignty leaves with the false conclusions, with the idea that they should love more carefully, more guardedly, less fully, that the wholeness of their investment was the problem, that needing genuine reciprocity was asking for too much. These conclusions are the avoidance architecture's parting gift, and they are poisonous to everything that comes after. The person who leaves with genuine narrative sovereignty carries instead the accurate conclusions that they are capable of extraordinary love, that genuine reciprocity is a reasonable requirement, that the dynamic's outcome said everything about the avoidant's current capacity and nothing about the worthiness of what was offered. The second characteristic is what might be called calibrated openness, the specific quality of someone who has been through something genuinely difficult and has emerged neither closed nor naive. Not closed, the experience did not teach you that closeness is dangerous, or that investment is foolish, or that love is a setup whose punchline is always pain. You know, from having felt it, that the love was real, and that real love is worth the risk that realness always carries. The experience did not make you into someone for whom self-protection is the primary relational orientation. You do not encounter new people with the background assessment of how and when they will fail you, running before the encounter has had time to become anything. But not naive either. Calibrated. The specific, earned, non-intellectual attunement to the difference between someone who is genuinely present and someone who is performing presence while their nervous system plans the retreat. The felt sense of what genuine reciprocity feels like, as distinct from the approximation of it that managed availability produces. The specific sensitivity to the early signals of avoidant architecture, the particular quality of charm that exists at the surface of someone who has learned to be socially skilled as a compensatory mechanism for the intimacy they can't sustain. The specific texture of warmth that is real but rationed. The characteristic way that genuine closeness produces a subtle shift rather than a deepening in someone whose deactivating strategies are beginning to engage. You can feel these things now, not because you have become cynical or hypervigilant, but because you have direct experiential knowledge of what they feel like from the inside of a relationship where they were operating at full capacity. And that knowledge, carried forward into new connections, means that you will not be deep into another avoidant dynamic before you recognize what you are in. You will recognize the texture earlier, and recognizing it earlier means you have genuine choices available earlier about how much to invest, what to address directly. Whether the person's self-awareness and motivation make the dynamic worth navigating, or whether the honest assessment is that the capacity isn't there for what you now know you require. The third characteristic is what could be called the completion of grief, the genuine, thorough, to-the-bottom working through of the loss, not performed, not rushed, not managed into something more comfortable than it actually was. That allows you to be in the present without the past running as background interference. The completion of grief is not the absence of memory or the absence of feeling when the memories surface. It is the absence of the open wound quality that unprocessed loss carries. The difference between a scar and an injury. The scar has history and texture and is part of the complete story of what happened. The injury still bleeds when it is touched and requires protection and management and generates the anticipatory flinching of something that could hurt again. The completion of grief converts the injury to scar, not by diminishing what happened, not by pretending the loss was smaller than it was, or the connection less real than it was, or the pain of the dynamic less costly than it was, but by allowing all of it to have been fully felt, fully metabolized, fully integrated into the complete picture of who you are and what you have experienced and what that experience has built in you. The grief was real, it was felt, it completed, and what remains is not the open wound of something unfinished, but the solid, unbleeding history of something that was fully lived and fully survived and fully converted through your own interior work into the material of genuine wisdom. That completion is what allows genuine presence in new connections, not the managed presence of someone who is being careful, the genuine, unguarded, fully available presence of someone who has nothing to protect against, who brought their full self to a difficult experience and found, on the other side of it, that the full self survived intact and is available to be brought fully to whatever comes next. What comes next is not scripted, and the absence of a script, the genuine, open, non-predetermined quality of what exists on the other side of this arc, is itself part of what the development produces, because the scripted version of what comes next would be organized around the avoidant, around whether they come back and what form the coming back takes, and whether the form is sufficient, and whether the reconnection becomes what the connection always had the potential to be. The scripted version would position everything that has been described: the genuine self-development, the narrative sovereignty, the calibrated openness, the completion of grief, as means to the end of the avoidance eventual return, as the right moves in the strategy of getting someone back. That is not the story. The development was not the strategy. It was the point, the genuine, valuable, worth having regardless of what follows development, of a person who went through something genuinely difficult and chose, through that difficulty, to become more rather than less, more themselves, more capable, more honest about what they need and what they bring, and what genuine connection looks like when it is actually mutual, more complete in the specific sense of someone who has integrated a difficult experience rather than managing around it. That person, the one you have become through the arc of this, is the person worth being, with or without the avoidance recognition of it, with or without the outcome that the hoping self would have scripted if the story had been up to the hoping self to write. The avoidant, if they come back, if the protest response and the genuine development and the specific, irreplaceable weight of what you represent in their interior produces the approach that everything described points toward, will be coming back to someone who is genuinely different from who you were when the dynamic was running. This is not a threat. It is not a warning that the bar has been raised in ways that are designed to be difficult to meet. It is simply the accurate description of what has happened and what it means for what any reconnection would actually involve. They will be meeting someone whose investment is no longer organized around hoping they will eventually become available. Someone who has recalibrated their understanding of what genuine reciprocity feels like and is no longer able to accept the managed version as sufficient. Someone whose self-knowledge includes the specific, earned, experientially grounded understanding of what this dynamic costs and what it requires and what the difference looks like between an avoidant who is genuinely developing and an avoidant who is performing development, while the architecture reasserts itself in the background. Meeting that version of you, if they come back, will require the avoidant to show up differently than they have ever shown up before. Not perfectly, not without the retreats and the oscillations and the non-linear progress that genuine development always involves, but differently in the essential way, in the way that is visible not in any single interaction, but in the direction of travel across multiple interactions, in the general movement toward more genuine presence, more honest communication, more sustained availability, rather than the familiar orbit of the same managed distance. Whether the avoidant is capable of that different showing up, whether the genuine development that the loss and the regret and the architecture's deterioration set in motion has progressed sufficiently to meet the different version of you that your own development has produced, is the question that only time and sustained behavior can answer, not their words, not the sincerity of their feeling in the moment of the approach, the direction of travel, the consistency of the showing up, the evidence accumulated across the full arc of the reconnection that something in them has genuinely reorganized, rather than temporarily overridden. And if they cannot show up differently, if the approach, however genuine in its feeling, is not yet backed by the interior development that would make sustaining it possible, then what you now have, that you did not have before, is the genuine capacity to recognize that clearly and respond accordingly. Not from bitterness, not from the protective hardening of someone who has been hurt and is refusing to risk being hurt again, but from the genuine, grounded, narrative sovereign, calibrated clarity of someone who knows what they are looking at. Who can hold warmth for the person and the feeling and the genuine significance of what existed between you, while simultaneously holding with equal clarity the honest assessment of what is currently available and what is currently not. That dual holding, warmth and clarity simultaneously, compassion and discernment as partners rather than opposites, is the specific hard-won, fully earned capacity that this entire arc has been building in you. It is what makes you capable of genuine love without the loss of yourself that the previous dynamic required. What makes you available to connection without being vulnerable to the specific damage that connection without adequate reciprocity produces. What makes the next significant relationship, whether with the avoidant who is genuinely developed or with someone new whose capacity was never in question, the kind of relationship that the full arc of your becoming has been preparing you to inhabit. Not the relationship you had, not the relationship you hoped for, the relationship you deserve, the one built on the foundation of two people who are actually, presently, genuinely capable of what they are offering each other. The one that doesn't require either person to manage themselves smaller or hope more patiently, or sustain the connection through one person's fear on the other person's behalf. The one that is simply, mutually, actually there, as complete as you are, as real as what you have become, as worthy of what you now, finally, fully, genuinely know yourself to be. That is what all of this was building toward, and it is enough, more than enough. It is, in the complete and honest accounting of everything this arc has produced in you, exactly what the becoming was always for.